Righty, lads. Today we've got another session. Now this one, I'm not gonna bury the lead. I think this was in like the top three sessions of the campaign. I'm very happy with how this one turned out ultimately. So that having been said, I do think I'm going to start with the negative, get that out of the way, and then move on to the positive side because I think that's going to be the majority of what I've got to talk about. So, I know as a player of RPGs in person, especially with like friends when you're like hanging out with them, cross talk, table talk, unrelated tangents, yada yada. That stuff is just going to be an inevitability, when you're with people and all that, and you're hanging out for a while. And, I think that's fine. And, like, not only is it fine, I think it's, like, it can be a good thing. It can give you a chance to take a breather, to take a break from the game, stop yourself from getting, like, burnt out, have a moment to talk about literally anything other than D&D, because like the worst thing you can have happen is get to a point or a sense of a feeling that people at the table are just done with it and they just want to get this over with. So like talking about other stuff gives you an opportunity to take that break that makes you ready to continue playing later. That having been said, I think ideally, in a perfect world, I'd take maybe like, so let's say over the course of a session, there'll probably be an hour that is spent of that time that is talked about, or that is spent talking about anything that is like just totally unrelated. I think ideally, like I don't mind that is the case, that like an hour is spent talking about whatever. But like in a perfect world, I like maybe 30 minutes spent at the beginning, getting it out of your system, talking about whatever. Then we're, getting into the game. And then, halfway through, take a 30-minute break, talk about whatever, and then finish out the rest of the session. Or like wait until halfway through the session, take like an hour, just talk about anything other than D&D, and then finish the session. But this session, what sort of ended up happening is like we'd make like 15 minutes of progress, and then there'd be like a 5-minute unrelated conversation, 15 minutes of progress, 5-minute unrelated conversation, 15 minutes of progress, and like a 5-minute tangent. And I do think that kind of acted to sort of like detract from the flow, from the momentum, from the people's ability to really like get immersed in the situation and in the game, because we're constantly like getting into these moments where we're talking about totally unrelated stuff and then like not being in the game, and like it's just kind of jarring, constantly going back and forth between the two. I mainly attribute this to three things. The first of which I don't think there's really anything anyone could do about, which is just we had people that had to both leave early in the middle of the session, and we had people that came in during the middle of the session. So, when people get in that headspace of like, oh, I remember this thing and I want to tell people about it before I forget, you don't know if, depending on where you are in the game, if you're going to get that opportunity to do so. So you're just going to take the like immediate chance to tell people about it, which like I get there's really not anything you can do about like schedules. Like that's just the real world, and you just gotta live with that. Second thing that I think I probably could have done something about it, something that I really try to do, at least in some of our past sessions, is just have like a strict food plan set up before the game so that people know like we will have a like we've got something for food in mind, so it's not something we've got to like take time away from the session to talk about in the middle of the game. And also it's going to be a thing where like people don't have to like worry about, am I going to be hungry through this whole thing. That kind of just came from like a place this session of not exactly knowing when we were going to start and like who was going to be present at any given time. So it wasn't really possible for me to plan that ahead of time. But in the future, I definitely think I will go out of my way to just make sure that that is like set in stone before this session. Especially because I think it just has a it kind of just adds to like having a natural added in break of like, okay, so halfway through the session we're gonna have food. This will give everyone an opportunity, 30 minutes or an hour, get all the unrelated talk out of the system. Also, by the way, this is not including like joking about the game. That I think is fine, and natural and like fun part of playing D is just uh, making goofs and gaffs about what's going on in the game, which I'm fine with because I like at least it's tangentially related, so I don't think it's getting people out of the headspace of like the immersion and of the flow of the game. Like it is possible for that to become a problem, but generally not something I'm concerned about. Third thing, uh, there's a possibility there might have been like a touch too much like alcohol flowing, which I do generally think is a better, more uh, just an easier headspace to work with in D&D when you got just enough of that buzz in you, just a couple of drinks in you to like loosen up and not feel so awkward or not feel so when you lower your inhibitions and you're more willing to talk like a wizard. I think that's great for everyone involved. That having been said, there is a fine line between the like just enough to be loosened up to the point of like being incapable of doing very like I don't want to say complicated, but just multiple addition and subtraction problems in just like a very sudden, just in a second. Uh, so like I don't think anyone got like distracting. Like I don't think it was a real problem, but I think all three of those things combined added up created like a situation, a circumstance where there was a lot of breaking in the flow of the game, which is definitely something I'm going to want to work on in the future to try to prevent that from being like a problem. And again, I don't think it was like a real problem. I think it was like sort of bordering on the line of like distractions detracting and taking away from people's ability to get like immersed and get a good game flow going. uh but yeah, so that's all that out of the way. As for the session itself, Humdu, Meng, Adrian, Nimbus, we picked up where basically we left off on the last session. We're finishing out the whole recovering the banner from the mines of the dwarf hold. Starting off, so there was some general downtime stuff that occurred, and then Meng, she left her fiddle, her magical fiddle, and her valuable jewels in the vault of the dwarf hold. Which, when this was happening, I thought I was excited to see where this would go, because I knew there was a possibility that the dwarf hold would fall by the end of this session, which I thought like, okay, well, if that does happen, then this will be great because it'll just make for a free adventure hook and a free just like full adventure ready for some future session. So I was pretty happy when that ended up happening. Which, on the other hand, maybe it's going to lead to everyone always wanting to hold everything they ever have on their person, which, maybe that becomes a problem, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Okay, so they're hanging out in Kern Darum. They're talking to the Thane Dartok, who's sort of he tells the player he's on board with trying to get everyone, all these entities, to work together against the Corpse Weaver, and he sort of just offers the like any resources the players think is necessary, just that he has at his disposal. And the players take him up on this and say, like, well, let's, like, if you could build us a bridge so that we can get across that spider cavern, then that'd be great. So they go back to the mines. They head over that cavern, get back to where they were. They encounter an NPC by the name of Ziggy Arlo, a worshiper of Silvtar. Now, this was a kind of minor blunder on my part, because, well, this guy I had, for one, I had written this whole session like 3 weeks ago when we ran the last session, so I kind of forgot at this point what everything I had, which I guess this is sort of the downfall of when I start writing my D&D prep notes being extremely sparse. And when they ran into him, he was just kind of a guy that was there, and I forgot that, like, I had intended for him to be like this peace and love hippie type, and instead he didn't really have much of any personality instead. And my intention for him was to be a sort of DM PC, at least for this session, to tag along with the party, because I do find it very helpful to have someone with the party when things either slow down or stop, or when everyone just stops talking for whatever reason. I can chime in with him and tell everyone, like I can just get the ball rolling again, or he can just be a guy to bounce ideas off of from the players. Obviously, like, you don't want to go full DMPC and have him just start solving problems and just telling everyone what to do all the time. But just to be a guy that is there, that I can, like, just, like, well, if they start getting off topic, I can just interrupt them by having this NPC start talking about whatever. But when they ran into him, I kind of emphasized, like, hey, I'm tired, I'm weary, I need to rest. And so the players were like, okay, well then, like, go back to the dwarves then, and, like, get some rest then, if that's what you want. And I was like, yeah, fair enough. Where I should have, like, more so made it clear, like, hey, give me some food, give me a potion, and I'll tag along with you guys. Which, okay. So he just ended up leaving and then not really being relevant for the rest of the session. Then, for the first time, the players had encountered the big bad evil guy in the flesh, or in the bones in this circumstance. They had witnessed the Corpse Weaver riding on his weaved centipede of corpses, and he's got a real like fascisty vibes going on with his reveal of, like, these projections of this future in which he has taken over everything in cities and has his army marching through the streets. I definitely tried to amp up him being a real threat, and so the players saw him and then kind of, like, ran away. He had an entire army of, like, 100 dark elves, or 200 dark elves, I should say, marching behind him, all with spider silk boots, making their their army entirely silent. And I was really expecting the players to, maybe not fully, I was at least 50% expecting the players to interact with him, either just having some sort of like, oh, so this is the guy we're supposed to kill. All right, well then let's fight him here. So I did prepare some sort of an interaction with, if the players did talk to the corpse weaver, which they ended up not doing, which was totally fine, because it did mean that I did at least succeed in the job of making the big bad evil guy seemed like a force to be reckoned with and an evil entity to be respected rather than to just be clowned on and to be trifled with and to be messed with, which is a problem that has certainly occurred with campaigns in D&D, and is a very stereotypical trope of like things going wrong in a campaign when people just start immediately clowning on the big bad evil guy as soon as he appears. So I think that's fine that they just sort of left him be. Then we had Bremreel, another player, show up. He was infiltrating a cult to Tyrachnis of these drow that had taken the banner, and they were holding it in their temple. So the players sort of run into all these guys and they fight them, they kill them. In this fight, Meng did get a chance to get this sort of highlight moment of showing off her spell thief abilities of being able to steal lightning bolt from the head priest and then just like blowing up like a bunch of drow with it. Which I will say was like cool and hype, and I do think Spell Thief did work the way I generally was hoping it would. That having been said, I definitely don't think I can keep it as consistent as it was in this combat, because like if they can just take like the best spell that a wizard has every time they fight them and then just kill them with it, then every single wizard fight is just going to become a complete cakewalk. So I'm definitely going to have to pull back a little bit what the spell thief is, at least how consistent it is, just so that like you don't completely destroy every wizard that you ever run into. But they kill these cultists. Bremril gets the priest's shield. They run back to the temple. Now, at this point, I was mostly expecting them to go back to the dwarves and warn them and do some combination of either trying to blow up the tunnel, trying to trap or stop this army to some extent, maybe sabotage that bridge that the dwarves had constructed, do like anything along those lines. But most specifically, I was expecting them to get back to the dwarves and warn them about what had happened. But instead, they just went back to the temple to recover the banner, which, fair enough. So they go back to the temple. There is an altar there that requires a sacrifice. Now, initially, I was intending for them to have Ziggy with them at this point, and they were going to have to sort of be faced with this like moral dilemma of like, well, we've got to sacrifice someone in order to open this altar and get this banner. And hey, we do have Ziggy with us here. That would be a really convenient person to kill. But they didn't have Ziggy with them. Also, okay, so the like question was gonna arise of like, hey, think about the amount of lives that could be saved if we like get this banner and like form an alliance and prevent the like corpse weaver from just rolling over all these factions one by one. Like if we can get this, then maybe we can like get people to work together, um, or at least like guarantee that someone will be on our side to some extent. And so, however many lives taking that action will save versus the life of just killing this ultimately one innocent dude who had not done anything wrong. Um, but yeah, they didn't have Ziggy with him, so I just kind of said like, okay, yeah, you guys open the shrine and get the banner. Which I think if I did this again, I would have made this into some kind of skill challenge of like, okay, well, someone's got to like read and recognize the runes on the altar. Maybe someone has got to go around and find like clues, like some sort of secret torch like lever to open this thing, or then someone else has to use their like lock picking to try to unlock the mechanism, and you guys have to be doing all these skill challenges and all that, and that while and then like against the clock of like, well, the corpse weaver and his has sent some sort of patrol to check out what's going on at this temple. So there's like a racing clock that you guys are trying to complete all these like challenges under. But I didn't think of that, so they just opened it, got the banner back, and they started running through the tunnels. They were trying to find a new exit. They saw some shadows, some like undead demon type of guys. Killed all of those guys. Went through that exit, and came out into the like mountain range. And at this point, Nimbus had to leave. Okay, then they inspected to see what had become of Kerndarum, and they had seen that it has entirely fallen to the Corpse Weaver. I will say, initially, so I had planned they were going to go back to the dwarves, warn them, tell them what was happening, and there was going to be a thing of dwarves setting up defenses, raising drawbridges, closing gates, and then like one by one the corpse weaver and his army were going to like break through each of these barriers, getting closer and closer to the dwarf hold. Then Dartok was going to have a Denethor moment where he was going to say, you know, all the hope is lost, we stand no chance, there's nothing we can do, we're already dead, just let them in. And then it was going to be up to the players to either smack some sense into Dartok and get him thinking like a proper dwarf again, like a proper leader, or the players were just gonna have to take matters into their own hands and like assemble the defenses and start like commanding dwarves about what to do and setting up a proper response for this army. And at that point, it was definitely going to still be challenging, but there was going to be a chance that the players did successfully hold off this army. But that just ended up entirely getting scrapped. The dwarves just instantly fell instead. Which I guess, you know, Dartok still died with his honor as far as the players are aware. They have no idea whether or not he was going to pull some Denethor nonsense. So, yeah, Gurndarum totally fell. It is now entirely under the control of the Corpse Weaver. So, at this point, the players had to figure out, okay, so what are we going to do next now that this has happened? This seems like this threat is becoming more and more real, and maybe this can sort of be like a straw that breaks the camel's back, and we can use this as a like a very tangible sort of like threat of an example as to like what is going to happen to everyone if we don't get everyone to work together. So at this point, I had heard about this sort of mechanic, this tool from another RPG, Blades in the Dark, called like the progress clock. And I had decided to sort of break it out in this moment, and I just explicitly told the players, okay, look, so in order for you guys to stand any chance to um, have like any way to stand against the Corpse Weaver and his army, you are going to have to form together some sort of alliance of at least five forces of roughly equal power to the Duke and his army. And at least one of our players was slightly hesitant to receive this meta knowledge because, as a player, one of the role players, you want to be able to act off of just the information that your character knows, which makes sense. Like, you should just have that character's knowledge and then make all decisions based off of that character's knowledge to be as true to the story as you possibly can. That having been said, at least from my perspective as the DM, that is already impossible and already not the case because you as a player already know you're playing a game and you know that decisions are going to be based off of the results of dice, and you know your character has these things called hit points and that when they reach 0 something is going to happen. And these are all things that your character doesn't directly know, but you are still making decisions for that character based off of this meta knowledge of just knowing that you are playing a game. And so from my perspective, I figure that for one, this just gives the players a very explicit goal. Like, you now like know what you guys need to do. And I think this succeeded in the fact that instead of the conversation, which has definitely happened on multiple times just in the past, players being like, okay, so this thing happened. Well, what do you guys want to do? Well, I don't know. What do you guys want to do? Well, I don't know. What do you guys want to do? Well, I don't know. What do you guys want to do? Which is a generally not very interesting conversation for people to have. On the other hand, in this circumstance, the whole, well, you guys know directly your goal and like what you have to do. Now the question is, how are you guys going to go about doing it? And I think that led to a much more interesting conversation of people coming up with proposals of ideas as to how we can solve this problem, and then there being a discussion of which of these are good ideas and which of these are not good ideas, and how we can make the good ideas better and how exactly we can follow through with them. And additionally, if or the alternative to any of this is if I just didn't tell them any of this and I knew that this was just a thing in the background and there was a number that I had behind my screen written down and that I could change at any time of like how many allies need to be formed, then it just becomes something that I can change and I can cheat at whatever time, and then it just becomes a matter of, well, when you guys have done enough stuff that I think sounds about right to be able to get your army together and have enough guys to take on the Corpse Weaver, and then it just becomes a thing of like, when I feel like it feels right. Which I think having an explicit number both makes, and having the players like explicitly aware of that number, adds to both it feeling more fair and it feeling more earned, because now the players know like, okay, when we have reached this point, like now we know that like we have earned enough allies, and it's not just a number that Joe thinks like, yeah, I think it's time to like move on to the next part of the campaign and the next part of the plot development. Like now, when the players get there, they know that they had, since they knew that was the target number from the beginning, they know that they had earned it when it does come to pass. And I do think it generally worked out the way that I was hoping that it would. So I am happy with how that turned out. And so the players had decided, okay, we are going to split up, and each of us is going to talk to a separate potential ally and try to get them to work together. And I think this was a great idea. I think it worked out really well. So Meng went to the Duke and basically explained what had happened. I should say also that all these players, they did get the banner, and they had all collectively decided we are going to lie about having ownership of the banner. We are going to say that it is still under the control of the Corpse Weaver. So Meng went to the Duke in our core city, explained the situation. Duke seems pretty much on board with getting together an alliance of everyone and fighting against the Corpse Weaver. So that was pretty straightforward. I did like, in general, all these one-on-one interactions because I think it really gave people a chance to role play without having this thing that I like can sense constantly coming up when there is like a group of people all role playing, is that everyone will either kind of just wait for everyone else to kind of say something and not be the person to speak up, or everyone is constantly stepping on each other's toes as they all try to talk. And so by having all these one-on-one private conversations, none of that happened, and there was a very clear and good role play flow that felt very like real and dynamic and dramatic, and I think that was great. So Meng went to Duke. They went this. That is also to say, like, not to say I don't think there's any value in group discussion. I think there is a very real time and a place for that, but I just think at least with this constant switching up of whoever is present at the table for any given session, it's just going to take even longer for people to master this dynamic of all being able to talk and like being able to leave room for other people to interject, and for these like big group conversations to have like a ideal flow. So we had then had Adrian talk to Prince Bel Elior of Nylal de Thor, and he swore an there's like a highly sacred oath to the elves, basically ensuring that he would return the banner to them if they like decided to work alongside with the Duke. So it seems like they've mostly got the elves in on this as well. Then Adrian spoke to his love, his wife, Lady Arwen. I think this was some pretty like high tier role play discussion dialogue we had between the both of us. I think, we both know the tropes. We both know the long lost love interaction from a million different stories or whatever. So we were pretty much on point with how that conversation went. I think if I did it again though, or especially like during the moment, I was like, ooh, I wish like I want to like close off this conversation with like dropping a bomb, something like, and guess what? I'm pregnant. But obviously not that, but something like along those lines to like just drop some real drama just right in the middle of their interaction. But I couldn't think of anything that was like properly dramatic, like not being too far in any direction. So that conversation just kind of ended on a like, uh, on a kind of just sour, like in character sour note, which I think was very reasonable and expected and fitting for the interaction that they had. But yeah, no, I do wish I had some like uh, something there, maybe some kind of like uh, I don't know, maybe something about her picking up on the fact that they do still have the banner, something like that. I don't know, but I do think generally that was some of the like peak role play we had that session. Bremril went to the Roadhounds, his gang of werewolves, told them that they might have a chance to get some money and working alongside the Duke, which, that one went pretty fairly. That one, I am very, very happy that Bremril had written down all the leaders and all of their things for the Roadhounds and the conflict that was going on in their ranks, because I had this written down, but I had it written down on paper and pencil, so it was lost in my binder of a bajillion notes just shuffled in that pile. And I like vaguely knew that this was a thing that was happening, but I completely forgot the names and the exact circumstances. So I'm very happy that they had that Bremril had all of that stuff written down, because it made for a accidental, a perfect conflict introduction that will make for some uh, like interesting developments in how that goes down, because he had reminded me that Bastion was very specifically the freedom and independent minded leader, and then there was the like rival leader Elena, had uh who had uh wanted to take the organization and make it into a proper noble family. And in the conversation that I had with Meng as the Duke, he very explicitly stated that the only way that he would trust the Roadhounds was if one of them swore fealty to him and he took them on as a vassal. And so that ended up just like accidentally being a perfect development. So yeah, so very very happy that Bremril had all that good stuff written down. Okay, then Humdu went to Gobgank. Well, okay, actually, before this, Humdu saw a scrying eye um, coming out from the gate and like scouting the area. Well, he decided to hide, which makes sense, because yeah, I wasn't gonna like force this eye to see him and then force him into an interaction. Like if he wanted to hide, that sounded very reasonable and like the kind of thing that his character wouldn't do in that circumstance. But that was going to be also my kind of. I was kind of trying to bring back that what I had prepared as the Corpse Weaver's introduction to the party, what he was going to say and do to them. I was going to have that happen if this eye had spotted Humdu. But that ended up not happening. So Humdu went back to the forest. He talked to Gobgank, asked him if he would be willing to join their alliance. Gobgank said yes, of course. But it became obvious to Humdu that if these orcs did work alongside the Duke and the alliance, that a couple of things were going to have to happen. The orcs were going to just need way more bodies, Like the orcs were going to need to like take over some other tribes of orcs and confederate them into their tribe, which I think is going to be another lead, a hook for some more future adventures, possibly some fuel for future side quest stuff. And also it became aware that it was probably going to be a tough sell towards these other members of the alliance to want to work alongside these orcs, because they're just very very violent, very unpredictable, very volatile bunch of crazed tribesmen and raiders and all of that. Okay, so that wrapped up pretty much this session. And well, we've got like a lot of leads, a lot of hooks for future sessions. I do think next time, I think it has been a long while since we had a good old fashioned set piece encounter. Like it hasn't been since Lurious Pain that we had a big old fashioned classic, lots of terrain and environment and stuff going on, big combat. I've been watching a lot of Dimension 20 and their like formula of like all role play session, then all combat session, and then all role play session, and all set piece combat session. And I do think I might lean more towards that kind of a style, because I do generally think it's a good balance between the two different like main D&D session types. So also at the end of this session, well, they did decide to all reconvene at the Khazad Lernaz, the hold of Clan Gilmore, because they thought that would be a safe place to keep the banner. And they had someone was like, all right, well, I want one more XP, so let's just do a quick little side quest. And I had looked at my list of side quests, and I had realized, like, oh shoot, well, on the one hand, these had either become a combination of either just too low stakes, like too low of a CR of like a challenge for the players and how many of them there are and what level they're at this point. These would just all either be too easy, or like we just either already just done all of these, like so I realized I need to refresh my list of side quests and come up with a bunch of new stuff that is level appropriate, stuff that will take like less than an hour to complete. I think like this is not the first time that like we've had multiple instances of where we just ended a session with a quick little side quest. I think the best one so far has been the Hag, because the Hag was tied into a character's backstory, had two little tied together mini encounters, both with their own little gimmicks, like the Hag with her cauldron stuff. And then there was like unique rewards at the end because there were all these like weird little potions that they got. So I think I need more stuff along those lines. I just realized like, oh shoot, I'd like run out of side quests. So yeah, got to refresh that list. That was maybe the other blunder of this session. So that wrapped up the entire session. I definitely think next time we'll probably pick up with some kind of meeting between all the different entities, all the different people that they have possibly forged this alliance with, and have the Council of Elrond or Council of Rivendell type moment where they're all going to talk with each other. And who knows how that's gonna go. That could really either go well and get off on the right foot and just have a lot of people about working together to face this corpse weaver threat, or it could go really sour, and all these people are going to end up possibly in even a worse position than they are in now. But at least they've got everyone, coming together and possibly getting in this opportunity to finally join together and join in arms against this threat. And okay, so the other thing I wanted to just touch on was the changes that I made to the system and how I think they worked out. Number one, merits and flaws. Well, for one, I probably could just still use a couple more minutes with each player individually to like specifically like iron out any ideas we have regarding these merits and flaws and like how exactly they are going to come up in the game. But I do think generally I am very happy with how they turned out. I think they have taken some characters that were generally kind of like ambiguous and like not very defined, and I think they had very much so more made these characters feel maybe not necessarily more real, but I definitely noticed like in the past, characters' personalities only ever really seemed to come up when it was sort of convenient to have as an excuse for the character to want to do something specifically. And then, other than that, the character's personality was just either whatever is convenient for this situation to go over as easily for the players as possible and just make this like uh, just like smooth and convenient and easy for them. And now with these personalities and these merits and flaws, I think people feel much more defined, and I think we are really starting to see some group dynamic, some like tropes, some niches in how everyone acts really being filled out. And I think we are really going to see how the personalities of these characters is having a direct effect on the campaign and on the plot and on the story. Uh, so yeah, generally very very happy with how the merits and flaws have been working out, and I think it's only going to get stronger and like more defined and feel more like characters in a story the more we go on. And I think we'll actually be creating an opportunity for some real character development when these merits and flaws get people into real problems and these characters or these other people like explicitly tell their friends like, hey, you have to change in this way or another before this problem gets us all killed. So I think we're finally moving in a direction where character development is finally going to become like a very real part of the story. So maybe I'll have to come up with some rules or something for how your merits and flaws can finally change and how you can overcome them through role play or whatever. Again, probably using some sort of clock mechanic of you've got to have this happen or do this thing this many number of times or in this specific type of circumstance, and then you will be able to overcome this flaw of your character. Uh, so yeah, so I'm very very happy with how merits and flaws have worked out. Also, I think like with these changes, like I think this system is finally like coming into its own. It's not exactly just feeling like a homebrew reskin of D&D, but is finally feeling like it has unique rules that are having an influence and an effect on the narrative and the story itself. Other major change I have implemented this session was resolve, making it a group mechanic. Another one, I am very happy with how it turned out. For one, not every player had ended the game with, or ended the session with multiple resolve, which had definitely been like a at least a problem from my perspective in the past, where I thought like, sheesh, like these characters could have multiple like more meaningful roles have happened this session, and then they still could have it felt like they had so much of a safety net and like so much of like a cushion to rely on that multiple more high threat roles could have come their way, and they could have just glanced them off, like just shrugged them off, because like whatever, I still have all this resolve to just spend on this and like make sure that it's not a real consequence that can occur to my character. So I think by drastically reducing the amount of resolve everyone had access to, helped to solve that problem, and it did encourage some group table talk when people had to discuss with everyone else, like, hey guys, do you think this is a meaningful enough of a failure that we think that I can spend one of our group's resolve on it? And yeah, that worked out pretty much perfectly. I think it very much so reinforced the idea that some of these roles and some of these situations the players have gotten themselves into could have a very dire and negative consequence, and on the story and on the narrative, or at least towards their character specifically as a whole. So yeah, I think it got all the players talking about that, which I think did sort of reinforce the idea that like, hey guys, the things you are doing and the actions you are taking will have a very explicit effect on what happens next. So yeah, I think it was a good way to get that like state of mind going through everyone's like heads or whatever. And the other things that did, I do think it like makes people want to take more risks, because they're like, well, worst comes to worst, like I do have this resolve I can use, which I think is like, too much of that can be a bad thing. But I think I've hit more of the sweet spot, that balance that I wanted between that. Oh Jesus, what else did I want to say about resolve? Having, oh god, what was it? Oh Jesus Christ, I'm completely blanking. There was something else. Well, yeah, whatever. I'll talk about it later when I remember. But yeah, so resolve, pretty good. That was it for this session. All right, I'm very excited for the next one. All right, I will see you guys next time.